Hi, Jez Bark here again. I haven't done a tutorial for a long time on anything, but I wanted to talk today about texture repeating using Brick PBR workflow. We Don't get me wrong, I love PBR X textures, they look great, but they do repeat on themselves. So they tend to be very small, and so with bricks especially, it's quite hard to get a non-repeating pattern going using PBR textures. That's why kind of Blender is so good when it comes to using the actual procedural textures, because you don't really get that to repeating. If you're not sure what I mean, I've just downloaded this Brick 4 texture here, which comprises of 4 maps: a displacement map, a roughness map, a normal map, and a specular map. And of course it will come actually with the diffuse map. In fact, if you click on the right hand side here, these are the maps available for this. And it's quite important to actually to have a look through the maps, because it can save you a lot of work in what I'm about to explain. Okay, let me just get on with it. So in Blender, I'm just going to delete this cube. Going to make a plane. Let's rotate it 90 degrees on the X. Let's scale it 20 on the X and 2 on the Y. And let's go to the shading tab, give it a name, let's call this bricks, and let's load our textures. I'm going to use the node wrangler shortcut, Control Shift and T, which allows me to load the textures I need. So I'm taking that Brick 4 texture we just looked at, and I'm actually going to load the diffuse, the normal and the rough, and just import those. And I'm going to, now I set this scale, it's 20 and 2 on the X and Y, so I can literally just duplicate those here, and now we've got our bricks. Now they look great. Let's close up. The texture works really well, and if you're showing a little bit of an alleyway or something, that looks great. But when you pan out and you were to look down the row of bricks, you get this obvious repeating texture. Some it's worse than others. This one's not too bad actually, but obviously you can see kind of like the constant repeating. So this method I'm about to show you works really well with the kind of any uniform style brick. And so let's get started. So I mentioned the maps before, and if we just go back to the website here, what we're looking for is we need to use a high contrast map that's included. Sometimes it could be the ambient occlusion map. So if I look at that one here, in this case that one isn't very good, but it might be worth sometimes going through these and having a look just to see which ones work the best, because it has to be kind of a high contrast black and white map. This one here, the displacement works really well, so I'm going to use that one. I need to make some amends to it in Photoshop, so let's go to Photoshop. I've imported that particular displacement texture, but what I'm going to do straight away is I'm going to rename it, and I'm going to call it mask, Brick 4 mask. And just for now, in fact I'm going to save it as a Photoshop file, just because it's going to, I like to kind of test it in Blender first. So the very first thing what we're going to do is to use the adjustment levels, and I'm going to squeeze the colors to make this, ideally this whole section here, as white as possible and the mortar as black as possible, like so. And it worked really well. I haven't had to work, here's my levels. I haven't had to work hard on this at all to get that quite a nice separation between the mortar and the bricks. So that's the first thing we do, step number one. The second thing is we need to make it a lot bigger, and to do that I'm going to just click off the lock layer button and change the canvas size, and I'm going to change it, but do percentage 300%, so I'm going to make it 3 times bigger. Do it from the corner and zoom out. And so now I'm just going to duplicate this pattern here, just holding the Alt button down. I can grab and move, whoops, grab and move, like so. Okay, so once that's done, you can flatten that image. The next thing to do is to create a new layer, and in the new layer I'm just going to take a selection. It doesn't really matter where you do this, but I'm going to put a gradient in it of black to white using the gradient tool on linear gradient, like so. And now I'm going to start painting. I'm going to duplicate this layer just in case I make some obvious mistakes. It's going to drag it into the oops, I can't do that while it's locked. I'm going to drag it into the whoops, didn't mean to make a group, to the plus, the plus sign. It makes a duplicate layer. And now I'm going to spend some time changing the brick colours from plain white to a mixture of black and white. And to do that I use the paint bucket tool. And the thing about the paint bucket tool is depending on the tolerance, it will feel, if I zoom in on a brick, if I pick a colour. Now the reason I've got this layer gradient here is if you hover your mouse over it anywhere and you use the Alt button and click, it changes the colour to the colour there. It's a very quick way of changing the colour. So basically I'm going to start filling these bricks. It doesn't have to be all of them, but some of them. Whoops, I actually need to be on that layer. And so straight away it fills that layer. Now notice the tolerance is 10, and I'm getting this little bit of white around the edges, so I'm going to undo that, take the tolerance up to 100, and that's much better. I'm still getting a little bit, but I can live with that. And so let's zoom out, and I'm going to spend the next probably 10 minutes filling all of these bricks, not all of these bricks, but a majority of these bricks with various different colours. It's important to remember that because this is a repeating texture, if I fill, say, this brick colour here, I have to do the same to this one over here, otherwise they're not going to repeat very well. So I'm just going to crack on. Okay, so to get the bricks on the sides here and the top and the bottom, the easiest way to do that, rather than kind of clicking the top and finding the one that's consecutively on the other side, is to use the offset tool. Now to do that, or filter, you have to find the size of your image, and my particular image is 6144, and I need to halve it when I use the filter. So basically go to other offset, and that is 3072, and click OK. And basically what it's done is it's offset those particular image so that I've got the centers, which was by the edge, is now in the center on both, and you can see I've kind of got this strip going down the center. So once again I just go back to the tools I was using before, the paint bucket. Whoops, make sure I'm on the right layer. Okay, and I think that will do. So I just need to use the offset filter again just to put it back to how it was. And I'm going to save that. It's a PSD file, which is fine. I'm just going to save it as a PSD file. And then we go back into Blender. And what I'm going to do now is just import that texture. I'm just going to delete this background thing. I find those get in the way a little bit, especially with what I'm about to do. So the first thing to do is to add a new texture. So texture, image texture, and then we'll load that particular texture I've just made, and it's my PSD file, Brick 4 mask, and you can see it here now. And I'm going to duplicate this particular mapping node here, Shift and D, and then I'm also going to stick that just on its own, and basically this will take the coordinates from here, so I don't need those right now. I'm just going to stick those onto here, and using the node wrangler shortcuts, Control Shift and mouse click allows me to see this repeating texture. Obviously the bricks are a lot smaller here, so because I've tripled the scale of my canvas, I need to divide that by 3. So well, that would be 0.333, won't it? So roughly. And so now I'm going to lose the brick texture just for now, and I'm just going to choose a kind of a reddish orangey color and stick that in there for now, and it should look exactly the same. And actually I didn't need to change the color, but what I'm going to do is just add a mix RGB, pop that in there, and this color here, that's where I should have put the color. And so this particular mode here, instead of having a mix, we're going to change it to overlay. And so now what happens is it will basically, oh, beg your pardon, got it on the wrong one. Let's change it again, I'm getting it right. So this one, this overlay here, it's actually at 0 at the moment, but as I start to push it up, it will basically just start to give us some lighter and darker areas of our bricks. Now I hear what you're saying, that looks awful at the moment, it doesn't look good at all. So instead of having this color here, what we want is we want a kind of a brick texture color. We want this kind of brickiness, but what we don't want is the brick texture itself, the actual brick looping, the mortar, so to speak. So if we head back to Polyhaven, and instead of the brick, what we'll look for is a rock texture, and we're looking for something that's quite smooth, nothing that's too much sort of light and dark in it. It needs to be kind of consistent texture, so something like let's have a look at this one here. Yeah, I think that one will do. It might be a little bit over the top, but we'll try it. So what we're going to do is we're going to download this texture. In fact, all we need to do is to download the diffuse for this one. So if we go to the JPEG and right click, go save link as, and I'm going to just save that into its own folder, and just going to open that folder. Let's go to my Blender. A quick way to import the textures is actually just to drag and drop them, which is what I'm going to do here. So I've added this particular image here, so instead of the red color, I'm just going to pop that into here, and you'll see straight away that so we've got this rock texture, but I do need to add a mapping node to it, another one. And using the node wrangler shortcut again, I'm just going to Control Shift click, and you can see our rock texture on there, and it does have a few bits in there which probably aren't ideal for what we need, but you can see that I'm still getting this looping there. this repeating texture, looping texture. So a quick way to help reduce that is just to rotate it on the Z. So you do get some looping, but it's not consistently in the same direction, as it were, in the X direction. So that's that. But to make it even better, less obvious that we're using this texture, and if anything, we could do with making it a bit smaller, so it's a bit more detailed. Let's take it back to 1, and you can see I'm getting this obvious texture looping here, which I could actually fade out in Photoshop. But there is another little trick going to do, and that's literally just to copy these. So select the mapping, select the rock texture, use the Shift and D, and in fact I'm just going to do that, because if we use the Control Shift and D, oh no, I can't do that because it interrupts with my, that must be a keyboard shortcut for my capture software. So in this case I'm just going to have to use Shift and D, and that will duplicate these two here, Shift and D, and then Control Shift and D, I'm pretty sure it's Control Shift and D, will actually do it and keep the links, but in this case it doesn't work. So this particular one here is a duplicate of what we already got. I'm just going to put the Node Wrangler shortcut on, and it's showing us exactly the same. And so I'm going to make it half the size and rotate it the other way. And now if I mix these two together with a mix RGB node, you'll see that we're kind of hiding that repeating texture, and you can choose a bit more of one or a bit more of the other if you want, but that works pretty well on the whole. And so now if I plug that color into my overlay node here, whoops, I'm messing up, sorry. Okay, there we go. So I plugged it into the color and I've still got my overlay. Let's go back to our principled BSDF. Oops, sorry, I got those wrong way around. And so now, if we look at our brick texture, we've got quite a nice rock texture there. What we don't want though, what we don't want is we don't want to see that brick texture in the mortar. So we now need to use the original mask that I made to hide the brick texture, the rock texture on the mortar. So if we head back to Photoshop, you'll remember I had that original layer here. So I'm just going to save that actually as a mask. I should have renamed the other one, actually. That's what I should have done. And now import that one. And so I want to use basically the black and white channel for this particular mask to hide these colors here. And so to do that, I firstly need to make sure that I'm using the same mapping node as I am for the actual brick, colors, and that's what I should have called it, brick colors. And so I just plug this vector into there. I need another color mix RGB. We use our color from this mask as our actual factor, and then we can plug in the original brick texture into one, the new brick, the actual brick texture, I suppose, the mortar texture, into there, and now we should have, there we go. So we've got our original mortar and new bricks, and so we've created a fairly decent looking almost non-repeating texture. I mean, it does repeat obviously, but nothing like as much as the original brick texture. And although I'm using this one, it's quite a high resolution image. It doesn't need to, because it's just a color. You could actually scale it down to um, like a, I don't know, 2K image if you wanted to. But that I found works really well. And what's so good about this is, of course, I'm using this rock texture here to create these bricks, but I could choose a different texture. So let's go and find another rock, and just to show and demonstrate what I mean. So let's look for something else. It doesn't have to be Polyhaven, of course. There's tons of good PBR websites where you can download rock textures. Let's take something that looks a bit darker. Okay, let's take this one here, Terrain Red. So I'm going to download that one. Just going to import that into here, and it's called Terrain Red, and I'll just replace it in here with that one, and there with that one. So we've just replaced that particular texture, and so we've created a completely new brick wall. And I find it works really well for most times. You know, if you've got something that's like not uniform brick, it doesn't work so well because the actual patterns repeat themselves. But here it's kind of like it just merges in quite well, and you've got quite a nice and pretty much non-repeating texture there. And a lot of it obviously depends on how good your actual rock texture is. These are probably a little bit big here now, so let's just change those back, change that to 1, and change that to say 3, just for, oops, what I did then wrong then, 3, there you go. And there you go. So the brick texture itself now looks a little bit more detailed, but once again, you know, you're not really getting any repeating in the texture, and it works really well. But obviously the caveat is you do have to spend a bit of time doing the colours, and that's kind of up to you as well. Obviously it's just a subtle effect, but it just changes it from a uniform to a kind of a non-uniform colour where the bricks aren't all the same. And you probably could use multiply quite to the same degree with that. Just a bit of trial and error there on your part. So anyway, that's enough for me. Signing off again for my latest tutorial. Hope it makes sense to you. Thanks very much. Take care. Bye.